you're gonna want one. Betcha.
Back in 1982, Nissan started importing a sporty coupe to North America. Sharing many parts with the Nissan Sentra, its goal was to remind everyone of anything but the Sentra, with its cool 80s boxy styling, pop-up headlamps, and, in its second generation, a configurable rear hatch that you couldn't get anywhere else. This is a story of the Nissan Pulsar NX. This is my old car.
I want one.
Nissan Pulsar NX at Datsun dealers.
We bet you're gonna want one.
Betcha.
Thanks for the many suggestions of several different Nissan models, including the Pulsar NX. I'll definitely try to get to the other Nissan models in later episodes. This is another example of an automaker with a name that is pronounced differently depending on where you're from. You've been hearing me call it Nissan, which is the only way I have ever heard it in America. But in the UK and many other places around the world, it is called Nissan.
He's pulling away in a Nissan Patrol!
I'm driving the Nissan GTR. It says it here on the steering wheel.
However, back when the Pulsar NX was first launched in North America in 1982, you may have seen it marketed as a Datsun, which was a name that parent company Nissan had been using since their incorporation in 1934. In 1981, Nissan began phasing out the Datsun name and instead used the parent company name for all of its vehicles. But it took several years and $500 million to fully transition all their cars, dealerships, and advertising to the name we all take for granted today.
We're changing the name of Datsun to Nissan.
I hope you're not changing all that room.
No, all we're changing is our name. From now on, we're Nissan.
Before North America first saw the Pulsar NX, its predecessors were the Datsun 210 and 310. Elsewhere in the world, these cars went by other names such as the Cherry, the Sunny, the Pulsar without the NX, and other not as colorful alphanumeric names. But the 310, which didn't offer an automatic transmission, was increasingly losing sales. The 210 was the more popular of the two models in North America. However, by 1983, the Datsun 210 and 310 gave way to the Nissan Sentra. If you're not from North America, you're probably more familiar with the Sunny model, which Japan started selling locally as well as exporting back in 1966. Besides having 2- or 4-door body styles, you could also get the Sunny as a 2-door pickup. They even marketed a version that they called the Sunny Van, although considering its shape and dimensions, it was really more like a wagon. But for a shorter time, they also offered the Sunny Cab, which definitely looked like a van. But back to the Sentra. Although it was offered in multiple body styles, including the 2-door hatchback, the early Sentras were never intended to promote any real sporty intentions. Instead, its primary focus was basic transportation and fuel economy, the latter achieving a number unheard of today for a non-hybrid car, 48 miles per gallon. To add some more sporty character to the line, the Pulsar NX entered the North American market in 1982. Elsewhere around the world, they knew it as the Pulsar EXA, or EXA, and was internally known at Nissan as the N12. It shared the same upright windshield from the Sentra, resulting in a slightly unusual look for what was intended to be a sporty coupe. Although it made up for that with one feature that made any car look cool back in the 80s, pop-up headlamps. But in its first year, it didn't exactly have a sports car engine, a 1.5-liter 4-cylinder making 67 horsepower, and being front-wheel drive wasn't a typical sports car attribute. However, by 1983, a turbo option raised the horsepower to 113. Considering it only weighed 1,980 pounds, 113 horsepower got you to 60 miles an hour in just under 9 seconds. Not bad for the early 80s. North America also was not fortunate enough to see the convertible version of the Pulsar NX. Marketed as the Pulsar EXA convertible, only 100 copies were made in 1985 and only sold in Japan. But many car models in Japan back then had a feature that would look peculiar to Americans, that being the side mirrors sitting out on the front fenders instead of being on the doors. Japan would later move the mirrors to the doors in later cars, but this look always made it easy to tell which cars were built for Japan. This first generation Pulsar NX lasted in North America until 1986, but it is a car that for me, as a teenager in the 1980s, I don't really remember seeing on the road. Instead, the Pulsar NX I remember was the second generation, which ran from 1986 through 1990, known internally at Nissan as the N13. This was a car that, at the time, I thought was one of the coolest cars around, but considering I only had just gotten my driver's license and had almost no money to my name, the new Pulsar NX wasn't going to be an option for me. Unlike the first generation's upright Sentra-like windshield, the second gen had a more sports car-like profile. Although it technically was a 2-door coupe like the first gen, the second gen had the unique ability to become multiple different cars. The back window and trunk lid were removable and replaceable, so your coupe could be transformed into a station wagon, or a shooting brake as many outside the US typically call it. The wagon version was marketed as a Sportbak, which was curiously spelled without the letter C. The design came out of Nissan studios in San Diego, so the missing C was likely intentional, and not a mistranslation from Japan that just happened to stick. You could also simply drive the Pulsar NX with the entire rear canopy removed, or fitted with a fabric cover with a plastic window. And finally, you also have the option of removing the T-tops, which they called the T-bar removable hatch roof. But for me, when I first saw the second-gen Pulsar NX, it wasn't the conversions it could do that I was attracted to. In fact, I didn't realize at the time that the same car could convert to all those configurations. And the attraction wasn't just the pop-up headlamps, because I liked those on any car back then. Instead, it was the tail lamps that I liked the most, made up of thin, diagonal strips that wrapped around the back corners of the car. Of course, there were just simple bulbs behind those diagonal strips. It wasn't like each strip lit up on its own, which would have been even better. But the look always intrigued me, and I never saw it on any other car back then. The second gen also had a bump in engine size, starting with an optional 1.6 liter in 1987 that made 122 horsepower, and later available with a 1.8 liter making 131 horsepower. This extra power helped since the second gen's car weight increased to 2,359 pounds. But the trick rear hatch wasn't popular enough to keep this generation alive in North America beyond 1990. The next generation, codenamed N14, continued the Pulsar name in other parts of the world until 1995, where it was sometimes still branded as the Sunny. Some of the most valuable of that generation today would be the GTI-R, a hot hatch developed so Nissan could race it in the World Rally Championship. Its 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder made 229 horsepower, went from 0 to 60 miles per hour in around 5 seconds, and had a top speed of 144 miles per hour. In 1991, the replacement for the Pulsar NX in North America was the NX, although it was also sold in Europe. In North America, it was either the NX 1600 or NX 2000, depending on the engine size of 1.6 or 2 liters, and in Europe it was called the 100 NX. It was a radical departure in overall look from the Pulsar NX, with the 80s squared-off styling evolving into a more rounded design that was more synonymous with the 90s. Although they still offered the T-tops, the swappable rear deck lid was no longer available, now with a more conventional, unremovable hatchback door. Also gone were the pop-up headlamps and the unique diagonal striped tail lamps. Mechanically, as well as the dashboard layout, it was similar to the Sentra SER, but the NX's ovoid look was a bit controversial for the time. But the trade-off in looks was a car that many sports car enthusiasts preferred over the old Pulsar NX. Magazines such as Car and Driver and Road and Track praised the NX for an overall driving experience that far surpassed the Pulsar NX. Whereas the Pulsar NX was more sporty looking, the NX was an actual sports car, intended to be more than just sporty looking, and therefore better than cars like competitors such as the Geo Storm and Hyundai Scoop. But the Pulsar name didn't entirely go away, as it was still used on various models in the N14, N15, and N16 generations outside of North America. And between 2014 and 2018, the Pulsar name returned on a new model sold only in Europe.
Introducing the new Nissan Pulsar. Your perfect match.
But they were nothing like the quirky models of the 80s that I still remember fondly to this day. Thanks for watching. If you liked this episode, click the like button and subscribe to my channel. If you once owned a car from the 80s to mid-2000s that you rarely see today, and you would like it featured in a future episode, leave a reply in the comments or email me at the address shown here. See you next time.